Thank you, everyone, for joining and good evening. My name is Malcolm. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at IDfy. Um, I lead our end-to-end privacy and data governance platform that we call Privy. I also lead another function called Propositions, which looks at industry-specific solutions. So thank you. I think we'll have more participants joining, but we'll get started. We have an exciting agenda today, and the idea is we want to spend time with leaders from digital first sort of organizations to understand their thought process and how they are approaching the whole notion of privacy and data governance in the spirit of DPDPA compliance. Now, as we would imagine, with a lot of digital first companies, customer experience is paramount. You always look to personalize experiences based on either implicit or explicit user data, and of course LTV is king, right? So in that situation, how do you balance the needs of privacy for consumers vis-a-vis business needs, user experience needs? That's sort of the objective of today's discussion. So there are four themes we're going to explore. One is user experience. When you think about trust and privacy is critical for consumers, but so is user experience. So how do you sort of balance the two? The second will dive into consent workflows. How do you gather it? How do you share it? A lot of times, digital first organizations work in an ecosystem. So how do you share that? That's what we'll explore. Third, I think, is data. There's of course data that consumers provide, but there's also implicit data that's generated by consumers' usage habits, usage patterns, purchase behavior. So how do you deal with that? Obviously, that's critical for the business or the service to be able to personalize and so on and so forth. So how do you deal with that? And lastly, we'll dwell on what's the value of privacy. There's of course privacy for compliance sake and to sort of, in some sense, be on the right side of the law. But is there more value than that that could accrue to organizations? So those are the things we're going to explore. It's going to be a very interesting discussion, and we've also got a great mix of panelists. So I'm going to now request each of them to introduce themselves, perhaps very briefly, and also tell us sort of how did you, at a very, very brief level, how did you get into the world of privacy per se? That'll be great for the audience to understand. So we'll perhaps go for simplicity's sake in alphabetical order. So I'm going to ask you, Abhishek, to start, and then perhaps Puneet, and then Sriram.
Sure, Malcolm. Thanks everyone for joining, and it's been a great privilege to share my thoughts on the very important subject as Malcolm mentioned. So I'm Abhishek, folks, and I lead the contracts for Zepto. And apart from contracts, I also look at other matters like CCI compliance, FDI compliance, consumer protection. As far as data privacy is concerned, I think it's not that it's a new subject. We do have Information Technology Act, which also calls for protection and having privacy laws as far as data, personal data is concerned, right? But having the DPDP Act and the rules which are yet to sort of come and get implemented gives us the much needed clarity on as to what is the legislative intent, right, and what is expected out of us in terms of compliance, right. While we all feel that transparency is something which is very much important, but it also gives us a lot of clarity which was sort of missing, or not there in the current regime. So very excited as we navigate to implement the the act and the rules as we go along. Now I'll pass on to Puneet.
Thanks, Abhishek, and thanks everyone for joining in. My name is Puneet. I currently work at Wakefit, been 5 year here, and I look after data in Wakefit. And I think the question that Malcolm asked, how I got into it, I think privacy is something which comes as an after effect of data, because one thing leads to another. So that's how I got into it. And with DPDPA bill coming in, since the time it got introduced in Parliament, I think a lot of us started discussing, and it became of and now that it is on the verge of becoming a law, I think it has been extremely important that we are all prepared. uh, so there is a law angle to it, and then there is a tech implementation angle to it, and then how do we balance user experience? How do we balance technology along to adhere to law? How do we still function as efficiently as we used to even after the law comes into practice? That is where I chip in. So I'll try to shed some light on those areas as we go along. And thanks very much, everyone, for joining in again. Over to you, Sriram.
Thanks, Puneet and Abhishek, and thank you everybody who's joined in on the panel. Thanks, IDfy. My name is Sriram. I'm the Group Data Protection Officer for the Zomato, now eternal group of companies that includes Blinkit and Hyperpure and other verticals as well. I was previously working as a corporate lawyer, specializing in data privacy, data protection laws. My career just so happened to coincide with the passing of the GDPR in the EU. So we had an influx of data protection work, and I was fascinated by it. And it was a very new and exciting field of law, which I took up at that time. And I just made a career out of it. A couple of years back, when the DPDP Act was passed, I decided to transition into that role full time by joining Zomato as a data protection officer. So that's how I started my career in privacy. And now I handle all data protection, privacy related matters for the whole group.
Thank you to the three of you. And as you can see, we've got a good sort of mix of different perspectives that hopefully we will hear. So let's get going. So I think we're going to start with a little bit of maybe a hypothetical question, but still kind of important to lay the ground. I think given, like you said, all of you are digital first organizations, data, customer experience, LTVs are critical. Now, of course, one is to say, yes, the law is here and therefore we're going to do something about it, right? But hypothetically, if there was no law, right, and therefore there was no mandate or deadline, as privacy leaders, how would you think about privacy within your organizations? Were you already on this journey? Do you think it would have anyways been of value? Were you already seeing that in sort of what you did and what consumers demanded, right? So would be good to just get that question going. Maybe I'll pick Sriram, maybe you to start with, and then Abhishek and Puneet, you can just add on perhaps to that answer.
So yeah, thanks, Malcolm. I would say in some ways we're still operating in a limbo of law, right? Because the DPDP Act was passed, it's not yet been enforced. We're working off of the 8 rules that are in the SPDA rules primarily. So not entirely a vacuum maybe, but not as strong as it could have been. But I feel over the last decade or so, but more particularly the last 5 years, privacy has very much become a selling point. And it's something users want, and they very clearly indicated. And it's not just your users. You have a number of stakeholders across the tech ecosystem. It could be your gig workers, it could be your customers, your employees, all sorts of stakeholders, people who are listing on your platforms, for example. And everybody wants to know that the data they're providing, they need to know why we are taking the data from them, what we're doing with it, and make sure that it's only being used for the purpose that it's been taken for. So privacy is a top concern for a lot of people, and addressing that concern itself, even in the absence of a law, is a big selling point. And it gives a reassurance that the platform that you're engaging with has no nefarious motive to do so. That there's a clean intent, and that very much drives privacy efforts across most organizations that I'm aware of. So I believe that regardless of the law coming into effect, privacy is something that is of paramount importance to various stakeholders across the ecosystem.
I think I completely agree with Sriram, and I'll just say that a lot of folks uh, are getting more and more aware of how organizations are taking data, what kind of different data is getting recorded, and everybody is trying to get an answer for that. Why and for what this is going to be used. I mean, I'm sure all of us have heard somebody saying that I was just talking about this, and then I got a offer from Zomato, for example, that I was just talking about biryani, and Zomato gave me this offer. So everybody is discussing this in their day in day out life. I think, I think we just arriving on point maybe a little late, but still in time. That we are talking about privacy not just as a law. It is a feature that everybody wanted. Now just we are just making it formal, and it is of extreme importance given that how many times in recent days only we've heard about breaches, data losses, and whatnot. So so bringing that responsibility to organization, that how do we handle data, what we do with it, is of great value, not just for the organizations themselves, making them accountable, but also to end user, that now they are going to be like universal owner of their data, so to say.
Yeah, I'm absolutely echoing what Sriram and Puneet said. And just to add, maybe, um, despite we not having a concrete law, right? The fact that we want to grow as a transparent organization, right? When the users, and in fact, they are in millions, right? They come to our platform, and maybe they look at our privacy policy, our practices, etc., etc. It creates trust, it creates confidence amongst them as to whether their data is secure. Can can their data be transferred without having encryption mechanisms, etc., in place, right? So that gives them a lot of confidence and trust as far as their data processing is concerned. And Supreme Court also, right, has recognized in its judgment that data privacy or the right to privacy is like a fundamental right, right, which has to be available for all the citizens. And organizations like us will have to devise their policies and procedures not only as a compliance burden, but as a business motive also, right? The more you are transparent, it creates another valuation to your company and to your organization as well, right? So I think DPDP will just add the more relevance to this subject. But having said that, companies like us and all the big companies, right, are already having data privacy as very, very key business requirements as far as their growth journey is concerned.
No, thank you. I think now that we've established that privacy has been there and is here to stay, I think, yeah, whether law, no law, when the law comes, etc. And I think, as you all said, it's only going to maybe accelerate or hasten the whole movement. Let's then maybe switch to, how do you what are the real trade-offs, right? And I'll probably go one by one. And all of you operate in fast-paced businesses. Every second with the consumer is important. Every interaction is critical, right? So how do you manage some of these trade-offs, right, without compromising speed or growth or personalization, right? I mean, that's the topic, and I'll probably go one by one. So Sriram, in your case, you operate obviously multiple businesses, but if you take even the food delivery business, or the quick commerce portion of the business, right? You're expecting very high frequency or high velocity of interactions, few milliseconds of user attention. So how do you balance, serving up privacy, being transparent about privacy, notices, those sorts of things, without, impacting conversion and those sorts?
I wish I knew the answer to what compliance without a cost looks like. But all things said and done, and I bring this up in a lot of product meetings as well, is that currently compliance with the data protection laws is not as difficult as it is sometimes made out to be. We are a very consent-driven law. It's a very consent-driven ecosystem. So as long as we structure that first initial point of consent carefully, and we have an internal understanding of all the pathways that the user journey can take, then you don't actually have to sacrifice speed or user comfort, and you just need to be smart about the sort of decisions you're making. But at the same time, what I've seen, and I'm sure some of the other panelists might echo, is that you can be compliant with data protection laws without having to give up too much in terms of speed or any of the other parameters that you brought up. Because, like I said, it's a very consent driven flow. And as long as I have that consent, and as long as I am not trying to do some sort of absurd gymnastics in terms of what I'm trying to do with my personal data that I'm holding, then you should be able to be compliant pretty easily and in a straightforward manner. Uh, Consent for privacy, like many other things, the more straightforward your approach, the better. You approach your stakeholder with clean hands and say, this is what I'm going to do with your data. Be upfront about it. And I think compliance is pretty easy after that.
Got it. So it's not really as big a trade-off as, in your opinion, as is made out to be, perhaps, right? Is
Yeah.
what I take away.
Might be a hot take, but yes.
No, I think it's great to have that point of view, and maybe as the other panelists would love your reactions as well. But Abhishek, maybe if I turn to you, obviously in the case of Zepto, it's obviously again speed. There's perhaps also sharing data with some of that data with people you work with and things like that, right? So again, how do you manage the necessities of the business model? A lot of it operates again at very quick decisions, with again this notice for being systematic and transparent. Do you break it up? Do you do it all together? I know there are various thought processes around it.
Yeah. So, look, as Sriram mentioned, the privacy policy has to be very, very robust. We need to be very, very transparent as far as the usage of the personal information is concerned, right? Customers will should be aware as to where all their information can be shared or used or processed, right? That's number one. Number two, and I think perhaps the most important was one is the guardrails or the policies within the organization, right? Internally we have a team, wherein it only focuses on giving a lot of trainings to the teams who are exposed to the personal information, right? As to how they can sort of get access to that personal information, and when it has to be shared internally or externally, what and can and what are the encryption mechanisms in which that can be shared, right? um, Under no circumstances the data can go out without it being encrypted, right? uh, so machines and machines should speak to each other rather than the data being visible to the naked eye, right? So those are the key things which we all should implement as far as sharing this information with, let's say, our delivery partners or our marketing agencies, etc., is concerned. You will have to also sort of uh, put sufficient clauses in your contracts as well, right? When you negotiate the contracts with your data processors, you will have to have the sufficient clauses which talks about data erasure, rights of data principles, etc., because ultimately, as everybody would be aware, DPDP Act puts an obligation and onus on data fiduciary for the compliance of data processors, right? So then you have to be like one step ahead in terms of renegotiating all your contracts, making sure that the same level of seriousness which is there in your organization, you will have to also have to have the same level of seriousness created at your vendors and or at your data processors end as well, right? In terms of any data which they process. So I think those are the things which are very, very important for us to sort of keep the data secured and also build trust amongst the customers.
Yeah, yeah. No, again, thank you for sharing that, Abhishek. I'll turn over to you, Puneet. I think obviously, not in the context of just your own current company, but more broadly, a lot of businesses like your own rely on obviously user provided data plus also other data to perhaps convert them, retarget them, cross sell subsequent products, etc., right? So how do you kind of, I know Sriram said yes, we should be transparent, right? But how do you be transparent about, let's say, data you've aggregated over time, perhaps, and you're going to use for business purposes? Some of these could be inferred data. How do you manage the balance the transparency around that to users versus, like I said, meeting your business goals?
Yeah.
So,
So, I mean, as far as data inferred is concerned, right? So, we just recently launched one product also, right, which was available for brands as well, wherein brands can actually get to know various behaviors of the customers. For example, uh, you know, there is one affluent customer who regularly buys your product, or this particular product is being bought by certain user segments. As far as you are maintaining the data privacy, you're not mentioning that okay, Abhishek Gemawat consumes, let's say, Dabar Amla uh, every 2 months or 3 months, but you will say that maybe of yeah, you might be saying that there are 10 customers who fall into the bucket of affluent category, who are your regular customers, right? So if you are aggregating those behaviors, not exposing the actual identity of an individual, but still trying to achieve what the brands would also like to achieve, right? I think that is a big mix or a big solve which organizations will have to do, so that the motives of the business are also achieved. And in terms of inferred data, right? Because we track user patterns day in and day out, and that becomes very very useful tool or useful data for brands to sort of launch new products or make some amendments in the interest of the customers. But it is very important for us to ensure that no PII is being shared or leaked at any point in time.
Got it. So, Purin, I'd like your take as well on it, and this
Sure,
whole concept that of inferred data, insights, stored insights, those sorts of things.
sure. I think what Abhishek said, I agree with everything. I would like to add that so we have been collecting data from customers in sense of PIs and what all they're doing, and we have been trying to infer that data to make their shopping experiences, their decision making experiences much more meaningful. So the thing that we always have been striving to look out for as a brand is to make meaningful addition to their journeys, to their decisions. So as a brand, what I think we need is a very meaningful and a very thoughtful data governance framework, which is based in and very well rooted in consent, explainability, and user empowered action. For example, uh, you I may think that this is the best recommendation for my customer, and we're a home solution company. We sell products from mattresses to beds to all kind of living and dining room furniture, and then to AI powered solution which helps you control temperature for your on the mattress that you sleep. Now, if you look at it, there's a different variety of data that is getting consumed, that is getting recorded, and we are using it for different ways. For example, at some places we might be using to personalize their experience, while for our sleep solution products we might be looking at consuming their data and understanding how their HRVs are doing, how their sleep score is. So giving meaningful insight to customer that they can consume in their day-to-day life and make and do improvement on things that they really care for is important. Second, all of this has to be driven with the consent of the customer. Like, it doesn't matter how many recommendation I can make for somebody if this is not useful for them. It is better that I have that knowledge right now. It allows me to make their experience more seamless, doesn't intrude, or show them that I'm not intrusive. Like I said earlier, that it should be a value add, not a intrusive trade-off for the customer. So as long as we are sticking to that, we are very clear in our consent messaging that see, this is the data that we're collecting from you, that these are the things that you're telling us, your age, your gender, and so forth, your name, and where you live. But I'm going to also derive these kind of things which is going to make impact on your decision making on your purchase. For example, I'm going to use this data to understand your purchase behavior and maybe suggest something which is meaningful to you. A lot of customers will be able to appreciate that, and somebody may think that I don't need that, and which is absolutely fine. They are helping me reduce my unnecessary intrusive footprints, which makes me slightly annoying in their daily lives. So that is also a good plus brand point for me, and that is I would like all the brands to think like that. It's not me restricting, it's not the user restricting, it's them, it's user telling them that this is what I like to know and this is how I want to see you consume my data.
No, thank you. I think we'll kind of move on now, but at least my takeaway is that there's a way to balance all this, as all of you said. It's not like trade off one versus the other. You have to sacrifice one versus the other. You can be compliant. You can, generate value through trust. You can do all the campaigns and run all the business models you want, but with the right safeguards, being transparent to the customer, having consent, etc. So that it's great to hear from all of you are practitioners from that standpoint, right? I think let's move forward to think a little bit about how do you operationalize consent, and I'll start with you, Abhishek. Right? I think on your platform, I'm sure you're seeing a different demographic, perhaps younger customers, more Gen Z, perhaps even Gen Alpha, right? How do you think about? I know there's been a lot of debate about consent, and countries like Australia are ahead on this path. I would say, perhaps. So how do you think about making that compliant in the world of DPDP?
Sure. So I think as far as DPDP is concerned, your consent, the initial notice which you will be sort of sending to the customers, it has to be very robust. You have to sort of have discussions with all your business stakeholders, marketing, tech, business, etc., etc. uh, Identify all the legitimate use cases and identify the other use cases as well, where an express consent or a specific consent is needed, right? So once that is done, and it cannot be a one-time compliance, right? For example, you take, once the rules are effective, you send out the notice, although all granular aspects have been covered, but our businesses are inherently evolving, right? There can be new business use cases, there can be new marketing use cases, etc., etc. So it cannot be one time activity. You will have to closely work with the business teams, with the marketing and the other teams. Any new activity which you feel that that is not explicitly covered as far as your consent, initial consent notice was concerned, right? You will have to make this as a continuous process, right? And before you sort of start that activity or start that campaign, you make sure that you have secured adequate consents from your customers. That's one. And secondly, I think there was a lot of hue and cry for the withdrawal mechanism as well, right? Um, Obtaining consents is like very seamless, but to withdraw any consents uh, of late has been very very difficult for customers, right? Customers have to reach out to the DPO or to the previous email ID and send follow-ups, etc., etc., whenever they want to revoke the consent. So we need to make sure that you devise your privacy solution in a way wherein as long as the efforts which are being deployed in terms of taking the consents or procuring the consents are concerned is very very simplified, same level of effort should be also be deployed as far as withdrawal of consents are concerned. And right, you have to build a culture wherein if the purpose is achieved and that data is no longer required, then you will have to build a culture within the company and within the data processors that you will have to stop processing, right? So I think that's the heart of the current act and the rules. You only can sort of use the data for legitimate purposes and for the purpose for which it was consented to, or once that purpose is achieved, you will have to sort of re-identify the need for you to continue to have the access to the data. So I think
Got
that's
it.
my take.
No, thanks, Abhishek. I think I'll move on to Sriram. To you, I think as we explore consent workflows, right? There's of course consent you take, but this obviously this consent or this data passes on to loyalty programs, credit card, applications, perhaps logistics providers, so many other. You can deem them perhaps at times data processors, but in sometimes if they're providing a service like like a co-branded credit card or embedded finance sort of use case. They also, in some sense, fiduciaries themselves, right? So how do you think about operationalizing in this sort of web of interactions? I think the processes is probably a little easier. Abhishek talked about it. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do there, but almost if it's another fiduciary itself, right? How do you think about that?
So you see mention of this concept very frequently nowadays, which we call consent fatigue, right? Because the users are sick and tired of saying yes, no, some, maybe all, to a number of pop-ups across your websites, your app flows. So the if the idea is that at the stage of every fiduciary, whether it be a joint fiduciary or which we call joint controller because it's a GDPR term, you just cannot litter your app with consent notices or nudges or pushes. And at the same time, a new fiduciary in the scene cannot process your data without consent. From the stakeholders' perspective, the data principle, the consent, they only want or they only need a single point of consent at the. So I feel the most elegant solve, which may not answer all questions, but at least makes sense logistically, is that your consent is embedded at the very beginning of the journey. But at the same time, it is guided by the organization's privacy impact assessment, so to speak, to say that in the normal transaction flow, these are the elements that get impacted, and you take a central consent for all of that. However, if there is a diversion from that flow, if there is a new processing activity, or if there is a new type of personal data that is being obtained, then in that case, you will need to have consent taken at that particular stage. So loyalty programs are an example, right? Not all of your users, not all of your stakeholders are going to engage in a loyalty program. They may go their entire lives without encountering that particular brand. So I don't need to embed consent for a loyalty program across all my users. That is blind consent. I don't think that's it's fruitful or practical. At the same time, if I am giving your phone number and your details as a primary identifier to a third party, then that needs to happen only with your consent because the entity should not be taking decisions on your behalf. Or if I should give you maybe a wildly different example, we also have district as part of the Eternal Group, live event ticketing. For some of the events for the Garba events that are coming up in Gujarat, for example, the organizers want data regarding the blood type of the participant because these users tend to dance in the heat for so long that it's entirely possible that they faint, they pass out and everything. But having the blood type is very useful. But that one personal data use case will not be applicable for 99% of my user base. So at that time, when we are collecting that data, we make it optional, but we also tell them why we are collecting that information, and we tell them how it's going to be shared with the organizer. And it will separately be subject to their privacy policy and their terms of use. So it's a matter of smartly knowing where to put in your consent nudges, at the same time not making it seem like you have to swipe through or accept a different document at each step of the flow. So I believe that is the workaround that most companies are having to use currently.
No, thank you. I think you made it simpler than it seems, Sriram. But no, I think that was a very, very specific and precise answer. But as you said, I think the art is literally figuring out what you sort of put where and how much load you put on the customer. But I think thank you for sharing that. Puneet, I think I'll explore a different aspect with you. Obviously, you can now, or at some point, you would have started capturing this consent, right? More formally in your journey or wherever at different touch points. Could be a store touch point as well in your case, perhaps, right? But there would be customers, historic customers who, in some sense, you might have not explicitly or in no formal way captured consent. Technically, to comply, you need to do it for all customers you might have. So how do you deal with what is, I guess, now being called retrospective consent?
Okay. So, and for everybody's clarification, we will have to, what retrospective consent means is that not the only existing customer, but DPDP Acts, whenever it comes, it will be applicable. All the provisions will be applicable to customer data we have been collecting in past as well. Now that being explained, I think what we're looking at is some sort of what I touched upon very briefly in a previous interaction on the previous question also, that universal user rights, which is independent of when we acquired those over the data, universal user right over the data, irrespective of whenever we acquired or whenever we started acquiring that data. So one thing is to manage those consent for users who even have not, who made their purchase maybe 5 years or 10 years back, and but may not have purchased another thing from us in last XYZ years. So there are two parts to it. One is uh, they definitely will have rights to it, but whether they will come claiming it in the short term or in the long term may or may not have any impact on how, whether this consent will be relevant or not. One thing which will be needed on our side or on brand side or on platform side will be to have clear technology infrastructure to record each and every consent, to make sure that that consent is recorded and is auditable, and whenever needed can be retrieved and reviewed what exactly did this user consent to, and are we compliant to that user's demand as well as what the law will demand. There should be clear setup in my mind for kind of revocation, so to say, so that and revocation of the consent from user standpoint anytime. If for example I'm reaching out uh, to a customer cohort which I think is dormant, and I want to reactivate them, but customer may feel otherwise or may not want to interact with, or maybe in a different stage of life where they do not want to interact with brands like Wakefit. In that case, they can raise that thing that, I'm not look I do not consent to get marketing information, but I do consent if there is any warranty and anything. You can keep my data, but please do not reach out to me. So those kind of provisional selection of what to get from the brand as a communication should be there, and we'll need to bring that kind of accountability in the system. Also, I think I strongly feel that the idea here is to bring accountability on how we handle data, how we make use of that data, and that is the perspective from which we are looking at it. So yeah, I think from a action taking standpoint from the user, or as far as consented, whether it is a registered user or a new user, what really affect them is when there is a if they have sense, and user may think anything sensitive while brand may differ, but if you're capturing PI, whether it is name or address or email or exact coordinates, you're dealing with sensitive data, whether irrespective whether you're in finance where you're dealing with even identity related documents or not. But essentially you are dealing with sensitive data. Second is those events that happen, they have to be reported, and that makes user lot more cautious. That for example, if there's a data leak that comes into light, then users become extremely cautious that, hey, I purchased with this brand, is my data also out in the market? So there should be clear policies for any to fulfill whether there is access correction of the consent, whether they want us to erase or whether they want to withdraw the consent, or they want to limit the consent. There should be clear technological provision for those kind of things.
Got it. Good. No, I think we sort of moving to the third section also in the interest of time. We'll kind of maybe just do a couple of quick questions and we'll move to the closing. Is, I think the one of the aspects of compliance and getting ready for privacy transformation is also discovering in some sense the kind of data you're sitting on, right? So probably address this to you, Sriram. I think obviously in India there are various kinds of data. It's probably lying in different places. It perhaps, and in certain organizations might also be lying at your third party processors, right? So how do you think about discovering this, and what are, if you might share, in the case, in your case, what are some of the challenges you encountered?
I think anybody who's started their journey on DPDP compliance will agree with me when I say that we've all vastly underestimated the size and scale of the data discovery exercise. Most importantly, because data discovery on its own will lack substance and meaning, because once you discover it, you should have the ability to map it as well. You may find the same data in two tables, but to understand how it got from table A to table B, and understand whether we have the legitimate consent to back that flow. For example, it's a very simplified example, is what qualifies as data mapping. And the particular challenge that you're talking about, like Indianized data, for example, is a data classification issue, because sometimes off the rack tools that are available on the market today may not be adequately able to discover all the data that's sitting in our systems. In terms of challenges that we've faced, without, I mean, going into too much internal detail, obviously, I feel like unstructured data poses a huge challenge, because this data is sitting in the form of Excel sheets, it could be emails, it could be documents, trace scans, etc. And obviously, there's also the case of archives. If you're a legacy company, if you've been around for any amount of time, there's a huge volume of data, terabytes, petabytes sometimes, that is just sitting in archives and backups that haven't been touched in years. So does my discovery exercise then include those? If they do, is it cost effective for me to do that? So obviously, one of the challenges we've faced is to find the right tool, find the right combination of tools to scan the data, to scan the metadata underlying that data, and to identify what data is sitting where, how is it working, what are the flows, and that sort of thing. So that it's a critical exercise. It's if anybody is who's attending has not yet started their exercise, I would highly recommend that you do so. Maybe have a chat with Malcolm. Maybe he can help you out with some of their solutions. It's a huge task. And it's absolutely the most critical, because it is going to form the fundamental basis for your DPDP compliance efforts in the coming years. And it cannot be a one-time activity, because if in all of our companies, everybody on this panel, in any tech-first company, if you do a one-time data discovery exercise, it will be obsolete. You'll need to have a framework in place to make sure that all incremental data that's either been added, modified, deleted, withdrawn, whatever, is also tracked, so that the little delta in data that you have, it's accounted for. Where's the new data coming in from? Why do we need it? Do we have the requisite policies and frameworks in place to deal with it? Was this data needed in the first place? It'll also inform all the other decisions you make regarding your compliance. It could be your retention policy. It could be the kind of processing activities you're doing, the kind of inferred data you can draw from the existing data. All of that, again, this will be your primary source of truth for all compliance going forward. So I would say it's the very first and ongoing activity that you will undertake as an organization.
Got it. No, thank you for that, Sriram. And I think again maybe one more question, and then we'll get to a little bit of closing thoughts, right? I think we touched upon this third party, and Abhishek had touched upon. I'll address this question both to Abhishek and Puneet, and you can quickly give your thoughts. Is this notion that yes, we share data with a lot of third parties, and we can't simply rely on tighter contracts, right? And say our job is done. So how do you keep track of what our third party is doing with it? I mean, yes, beyond a point, can you really control what the third party does? Not so sure, right? But what can you practically do to control what third parties do with your data, right? I mean, we're not talking sort of joint fiduciaries now. We're talking really data processors, last mile logistics players, delivery partners, those sorts of folks, right? Yes, you can tighten contracts, but what do you practically do? And would be great to get your thoughts, both Abhishek and Puneet, on the same question. So maybe Puneet, you go first, and then Abhishek, you want to add on. That'll be great.
Sure. So the way I think that, for example, and it's a practical question for companies like us. For example, we work with third-party logistics because we can't be available in all the cities to deliver product, and some of our products are heavy and bulky, which has to be handled either by us or some really mature third-party logistics who can take care of how bed should be delivered or how a wardrobe should be delivered. So I think there's what I really think can happen is that first thing is to understand what all data is being shared. Is there a possibility of minimizing the exposure on both front, on the vendor front as well as our side? Or what I mean by data minimization is we should anonymize wherever possible, so that uh, even if there is an incident in future, the exposure on the third party side and the way it exposes you to certain challenges in future can be minimized. Second, only do not share data as a luxury, as a pleasure or a luxury item, like you have enough of it and why can't I share more. Be like a typical Indian businessman, miser kind of a person who would very very pick and choose that this is the bare minimum you required and you only get this much. I think we should, and I agree that contracts should have all these data privacy as a practice, but the system that third party logistics or any third party for that matter has should be auditable, should have clear logs on what data came in, what was the consent that or what was the agreement we had of usage of data, whatever, and that should be part of vendor selection, and we should be able to review their kind of data usage policy, privacy policy, and everything. And lastly, we should be very careful in crafting our message, or the consent message to the customer that, see, we'll be collecting your data, we might be sharing it with these third parties, these kind of people for these purposes, and these are absolutely necessary to make to for us to provide you the experience that we commit. And maybe declaring that these are the steps we take to make sure that we only share minimum data, and you'll not and it is anonymized and it is deleted once, or removed from the system once those kind of purposes are solved. For example, we give 100 days of uh, customer trials. So as long as which means the customer can return anytime, and uh, so essentially it has to be in my system. But at the same time, if the customer is returning, and I can't share the data with my third party, I can't let them pick up the mattress from their houses. So essentially that makes it very difficult. So it has to be very very clearly communicated why, what is absolute necessity to do the business, and what is it that you can select for, as a pick and choose category.
Got it. Abhishek, any quick thoughts to add? What real controls can you put on a data processor
Yeah,
practically?
yeah. Thanks for this. So I think communication with data processors on data, maybe removal or modifications will have to be increased significantly come the DPDP Act. Uh, like I was mentioning, I have the responsibility for the compliance to be followed by data processors. So how do I ensure? Like you mentioned, contracts is just one part of it, but to operationalize it, right, I will also have to sort of continuously engage with my data processors as to, let's say Abhishek has requested for data erasure, please stop further processing of the personal data of Abhishek from immediate effect, right? And it is not that only once I am doing it, I will have to continuously do that till the time data processor also gives me an affirmative confirmation that yes, they have also made the requisite changes in the systems, right? So that is something which is very very crucial for as far as operationally ensuring that not only whatever is mentioned in the contracts, but it is also followed to the T by the data processors, right? And this is something which is very very important, because whenever you look at the penalties also, it ranges from 50 to 250 crores, right? As far as DPDP Act non-compliance is concerned, government will always see the bona fide of yours, right, in terms of compliance as to what all steps in terms of reasonable security safeguards which you have
Yeah.
as an organization taken to ensure that data leak or data breach does not happen. You will have to demonstrate that not only by having sufficient safeguards within the organization, having robust contracts, and thirdly also operationalizing how many times are you talking with data processors on the personal data removal or the modification request which have come is concerned. So that is something which is very very important for all of us to ensure come DPDP Act is implemented.
Got it. Good. So we're going to wrap up now in last 2 minutes, and we'll do this in a round robin sort of format. So in like literally one sentence each, two questions to each of you, and we'll go person by person. One is, beyond obviously the fine and compliance, right? What do you think is another, or sort of in some sense unexpected or additional or whatever you want to call it, benefit of a privacy program, right? And the second sort of sub question I'll request each of you to answer is, while people are waiting, what do you suggest they should do? Right. So I'll perhaps start with you, Sriram. One sentence perhaps on each. So just to recap, what is beyond obviously the core, avoiding the fine and all that compliance stuff. What do you think is the benefit of a privacy program? And second, what do you recommend people do while they wait for, we've been waiting for a while, but while they wait.
Understood. So, second order benefit for privacy obviously is trust building. The amount of faith, and it's a very slow exercise. People know that. So, 100% trust building. And you said one sentence, so that's going to be the answer for that. While you're waiting, don't wait. The government could spring the rules on you today, tomorrow, and they've had a head start internally to start complying. You're seeing little vestiges of that on the different apps. Look at DigiYatra first, and that's my canary in the mine. I look at the DigiYatra every time they get an update. Oh, we're closer to the rules getting operationalized. So don't wait. Just get started on your compliance journey.
Abhishek, your two on both of those points, your
Yeah,
two
yeah. So
perspectives.
on the first, it increases the transparency. Like Sriram mentioned, it increases trust. And second, I think, of course, organizations, the tech first companies have already started implementing whatever is required in the rules. Not that we are waiting for the rules to sort of let us know that now let's take the privacy program. It is not something. It will be a costly mistake, right? As far as weight is concerned, I think we all should get started. We all should make this as a part of prerequisite as far as my business goals and business growth journey is concerned. I think that's the only way to navigate through these compliances.
Puneet, your thoughts very quickly.
I think on the first point, I think it is proactive trust and bringing accountability on all of us. That what how do we deal with data? How do we use that to value add and not just be the processor or users of data. And on the second thing, I think we have started. I think a lot of tech companies, as Abhishek and Sriram also touched, started, and the right time is to start now because we nobody knows what kind of timelines once the laws come in place will we get, whether it will be enough or not, whether whatever we are thinking are the only thing we'll have to implement, whether it is going to be just consent or data discovery or what it is going to be. Nobody has, look, everybody has, it is open for interpretation, everybody has their interpretation, but nobody knows for sure. So there, I mean, I think nobody has ever gotten negative result by starting early. So I think please start early and like focus on getting as ahead of everyone else. Show your customer that we are building proactive trust.
Yeah, no, good. Thank you. I think we'll switch to Q&A. I know we probably have 5 minutes to less, but we might go over by 5 minutes for the panelists and the audience. So I'll request Nikhil, who obviously is a senior product manager and leads the PV stack, to just take us through, pick a few questions, Nikhil, and perhaps address it to the panelists.
Yeah, sure. Hi
And
everyone.
then the ones we cannot cover, we promise we'll find a way to get back to you.
Yeah. So yeah, I was sort of very active on the chat and on the QA sort of that is coming in. Looks like there are two, three themes that emerge, so I'll try to bucket them accordingly, right? The first one I think is on the back of what we heard from Sriram in terms of the nuance that you might need from on data governance and data discovery and it being an ongoing activity. There's a question from Nishi that comes in that is asking, the what is the right really way of doing this? Is there a need to really use some automated tools or technology, or can this be done manually by means of an Excel sheet and some process rigor on top, right? And there's a sub part to this question around dealing with unstructured data in particular, right? Looks like when the data is structured, there could be ways to connect to this and understand how this evolves. But when I look at unstructured data, specifically in our Indian context, right, are there strategies that are being seen? So I'll leave this to the panelists. Maybe Sriram, you could start, and if there's anyone else who would like to add in, yeah.
Got it. The answer to both of these questions lies in the scale of it. If you're a small organization, you can very well get started with an Excel sheet and then build a culture around it. But if you're on a medium or a larger organization, Excel sheet is not going to cut it. You're absolutely going to have to use some form of automation. Could be in-house Depending on the size of your team, it could be something off the rack. A lot of good products on the market now. In terms of unstructured data, my answer would be similar. If it's a small cohort of data we're looking at, and that will be, and we'll find out based on your data discovery exercise, then you may still be able to evaluate what sort of data you're sitting on, what sort of controls you need to put around it. But if it's at scale, or if you want to take your organization to scale, then you're going to have to automate that process. So it doesn't necessarily have to be OCR driven, but you need to have some sort of governance and controls in place, because unstructured data, if it's something like Aadhaar, even unstructured data could pose a huge compliance risk for you.
So I think from the cataloging is important, and Sriram is absolutely correct. It can be an Excel, it can be a very well robust tool. There are a lot of AI driven auto identification tool for structured data, and a lot of them exist even for unstructured data. But you can go with manual cataloging, all of those. Then there are unstructured data that exist in form of papers, prints, printouts, or like photos you have taken. Then you have unstructured data in the form of calls, where there is a lot of detail getting shared, and if any of those endpoints are vulnerable, there can be a lot of intrusion, and that can lead to a lot of chaos later. Protection of those endpoints is important, and having a clear clarity in understanding a proper tagging of that data, whether through an AI, whether through manual processes. But it is very important to catalog what is going on in this call, what is going on in this photo, what is going on in this video you've taken, or a textual message that you have taken, what has gone on there, properly providing dispositions, properly providing tagging to that content is important. So whether you do it manually, whether you do it in an Excel, whether you do it in a very well established tool, whether AI driven tools, paid or open source, doesn't matter, just start doing it.
Thank you, panelists. I think I'll move on to the next one. Again, this is covered in some part during Puneet, your sort of monologue on legacy or retro consent. But I think what I picked in the chat is there is a scenario, right? Almost the DPDPA is forcing us to really sort of think beyond a static privacy policy document, right? And therefore almost deconstructing this into a bunch of privacy notices that may sort of show up as various points of time. There is the question that the audience members asked is, how do you really look at ongoing compliance from the DPDP Act perspective as your privacy stance also evolves, right? And the customer may have given consent on a previous version of the notice or the privacy policy. What are strategies that you do, and sort of again open to the audience? Abhishek, maybe if you want to take a stab. This again, I think, is a very nuanced question, and therefore I thought it will be interesting.
So I think I'll just give my 2 cents, and then I mean we can hear from people who are there to interpret law more than a data guy. So my take on this is that as soon as there is a change in usage of that data point, or if there is an inference I'm making which I was not making earlier, if I'm going to use it for anything else, I would have to anyways reach out to customer with the updated consent, even with the retrospective or my existing customer. And they may or may not like, but that the change that we are bringing to the usage of their data, but we have to allow them the we have to allow them to make that choice for themselves. Like I said earlier, now whether we like it or not like it, customer is going to have universal right on the data and how we are going to use it. So, and I think DPDPA is actually enforcing that side of universal rights on the data. Like I think Malcolm in the very initial his monologue, he said that it's going to be users are going to have full right on what is going to be their data. Like it's bringing that DPDPA brings that kind of transparency and brings that accountability on me, that to make sure that all my messaging is clear. They're getting, if there's a change in my privacy policy, they get updated. They know what am I going to use their data for, what I'm going to infer, and how it is going to affect their journey. And if it is going to go to any third party, they should be aware of it. So just send an updated consent, take that consent. We have also debated with Anmol and bunch of other IDfy team members on how to take that consent without being too intrusive, without taking that much time. And I think Shriram also covered in his one of the answer that it doesn't have to be on every page, it doesn't have to be everywhere. It has to be one time consent, driving a lot of it has to be precise. So yeah, it can be a simple OTP at just some point in time, on the how part, that how do we take it, or it could just be a one message link where customer clicks, goes through the policy, submits I agree, and go moves on. Over to you, Abhishek. I think you'll have far more better interpretations.
Yeah, I think I'll just touch base the requirements of the act also, right? The act very clearly, by way of an example, states that uh, like you mentioned, that we would have already taken consents by way of existing privacy policy. The act states that you can reach out to the users post implementation of DPDP Act via push notification, email, and or any other communication channel which customer has consented to, right? Giving that giving them an absolute visibility on various use cases, right? Legitimate use cases and the other use cases where their data is being used by the company, and also giving them the information on the withdrawal as well, right? As to if at all they want to withdraw any of the consents which they have already provided for, what are the mechanisms in terms of withdrawing those consents. So I think that will be uh, required by each of the companies, right? How can always be different, as to it can be email, it can be some sort of other notifications, etc., etc. But yes, act very clearly states that you will have to reach out to the users again, just telling them that these are the use cases, and then take their consent journey from there, right? So that is something which will have to be done as far as the existing consents are concerned. New consents after this act is implemented will always be subject to notice, the consents which they will give, and bundled with the withdrawal as an option as well.
Nikhil, one last question and then we'll close.
Yeah, I think we'll do this one very quickly. I think we did not touch so much on this during our discussion, but there's another audience member who has said that as a cybersecurity consultant, sometimes the biggest concern inside the organization is the prevention of insider threats. These could be API endpoints, these could be people going rogue. And in the context of DPDP, obviously, as as we encounter a breach, it looks like there are additional obligations that are sort of to be looked at, right? As a DPO, it seems to go over and above what existing mandates may be from certain, etc. So it'll be good for the audience members to also hear what the requirements are for the act and how are organizations like yours thinking about, how do you unlock or really have a voice of reason within that 72-hour window, what all needs to be done, and what kind of planning might go into doing something like
Yeah, so maybe I'll go first, and then would also want to hear from others as well. So I think the biggest preventive measure, right, which we all should take as an organization is, how do I have robust access controls, right? Like Sriram and everybody would agree, we are exposed to millions of customers' data on every single day, right? Um, can my customer service agent, who is there to resolve the grievances of the customers, download the data of, let's say, 50 or 100 customers at one go? If the answer is yes, then probably you are at a risk wherein users going rogue, etc., selling the data, everything can happen. Or is it restricted to only one, two, three, four, or five customers per user at a time, right? So those are the access controls which are so very important for the organizations who are handling millions or crores of data. That's one. Secondly, in terms of 72 hours of window, right? And of course, the requirement of the act is to notify the users and notify data protection board as well. And unfortunately, the rules don't tell us that is it required to be done for minor breaches, or is it required to be done for all breaches, right? For if it is for all breaches, then it is like it will be a nightmare as far as compliance is concerned, because you have certain and then you have data protection board also, and you also have to within 72 hours time you have to discover, you have to also tell them that what are the preventive steps which have been taken so as to curb this particular data breach, and what steps can data principal can also take, right, to sort of safeguard the data. So within 72 hours, I think the timeline is very very short. I'm sure rules would give the clarity on minor breaches versus major breaches, and would also probably give extra time as far as data discovery versus data, these preventive steps or the steps which are taken to mitigate the further data breach is concerned. So I think that's my take as far as this compliance is concerned.
Thank you. Thank you. Back to you,
Yeah.
Mike.
No, I think I'm sure there are lots more questions and we can continue for another half an hour, but we'll have to sort of wrap it up here. I think, I think we explored, obviously, this is a different, all the sort of companies represented here, represent a different universe, right? In terms of premium, like we said, on user experience, conversion, LTV, inferred data, and like, so I think it was at least personally for me, a very enriching discussion. And I thank all the panelists for sharing their view. I think we explored everything from are they real trade-offs or are they notional? And I think it was very clear that there's a way to manage all of this. We explored consent flows, we explored data discovery, and I think Sriram characterized it by saying it's almost a critical step. And and then I think we also talked about value of this. Is just purely compliance? Is there something more? So I think it was a great discussion, and I thank all the panelists again as well as the audience for contributing. And like I said, for those we couldn't get back to on questions, I'm sure we'll find a way to reach out to you. So with that, we'll wrap up, and I just would like to say thank you to Sriram, Abhishek, and Puneet again for sharing their views, and have a nice day, everyone.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.